Good day. I'm Rod Kirsch, Consulting Vice President at GG&A, and your host for our program. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to our presentation on interdisciplinary initiatives and advancement leaders' role in such initiatives. I'm particularly delighted to have David Palmer with us today. David has served as Vice President for Advancement at the University of Toronto since 2007. U of T happens to be Canada's largest research-intensive university. In 2011, under David's leadership, the University of Toronto launched its Boundless campaign, concluding in 2018 as Canada's largest campaign in history with a total of $2.64 billion raised. David is a trustee of the Council for Advancement and Support of Education and is internationally recognized as a thought leader in advancement. David, welcome very much to you. I'm really just pleased and delighted to welcome you and have you with us this afternoon. There's incredible interest in the topic that we're going to speak about this afternoon. We are joined today by some 450 professionals from 13 countries around the globe. So to say that there's a little bit of interest, it would be a mild understatement, I think. David, before we move into our discussion topic today, I'd do a great disservice probably to our global audience if I didn't ask you about the most recent gift that the University of Toronto received from the Temerity Foundation of $250 million for your Faculty of Medicine. We could likely spend our entire time talking about just this single act of extraordinary philanthropy, but could you briefly talk about 3 or 4 factors which culminated in such an extraordinary gift?
Well, thanks, Rod. It's an honor to be invited today to share these experiences with you and with our audience. Before I answer that question, though, I'd like to offer my best wishes to all of our American friends and colleagues for a peaceful and calm resolution to the election, regardless of the outcome. I want you to know you have many friends north of the border who are sympathetic to and share what you're experiencing right now in terms of the divisiveness of the election, the persistence of the pandemic, and as we're all facing crises of equity, justice, and inclusion. I think times like these really reinforce the value of what we do as a profession and of the institutions we serve. And I also think that education, and higher ed in particular, is the most powerful and enabling antidote to these deeply troubling societal challenges. So in a way, the values behind that comment are really what very much led to the Temerity family gift. Over the last 20 years, I would say the Temerity family have quietly become one of our country's most generous donors. And to answer your question more specifically, I think there have been 4 factors, at least in my mind, that motivated them to proceed with this gift, which is the largest in Canadian history. First, I think it was the reach and impact, the leverage of what this gift could accomplish relative to other investments they could have made. The Temerity Faculty of Medicine, as it is now known, is a faculty of immense scale and scope, 8,100 faculty, 7,600 students, 900 staff, 22 departments, 14 graduate units, dozens of sites across Toronto and the province, 16 interdisciplinary units. There's just an enormous regional, national, and international footprint. And there's also massive leverage to this gift from the Temerity faculty's role as the single hub of a vast network of more than 30 partner hospitals and healthcare institutions across the region, including an incredibly strong group of 10 research-intensive partner hospitals, each acclaimed internationally and each with their own very significant R&D enterprises. I think the second area had to do with the alignment of values and how those values resonated with their own personal sense of mission and cause, and that faculty's capacity for excellence. In my view, every large gift has its own story. It has its own narrative. And at the heart of that story is a deep personal resonance with the donor's own story, which drives their mission as philanthropists. I've known them for 21 years. They're a tremendous family. I've had a long history of working with them. But they particularly value integrity, they have wide-ranging intellectual curiosity, and they have a really strong commitment to excellence in all of their endeavors, both public and private sector. And they, of course, align very well with the university's values. They were certainly attracted to the excellence and the potential and the ambitions of the faculty. It's generally considered a top 4 to 6 ranked faculty in terms of clinical medicine. There's a long history of discovery here. 2021, for instance, will be the 100th anniversary of the university's discovery of insulin and the 60th anniversary of the discovery of stem cells at U of T. So they saw the ambition to extend this leadership and impact and a thirst to engage meaningfully with major global challenges at scale and to convene leadership on these topics that contribute significantly to the advancement of knowledge. So it aligns very well with their track record and history of philanthropy in healthcare and health science generally, as they've given very generously to such institutions across Toronto and Canada and Europe. The third area, frankly, is a very sound strategic foundation. There was a well thought out plan to maximize the impact of the donation, which in turn validated the size of the investment we were requesting. The gift structure, the framework of this gift was firmly rooted in the medicine's strategic plan that had recently been completed in a highly consultative manner. And every element of the gift was tied to this strategic plan. And I have to say the donors are very impressed with this. Jim Temerty, the founder of the family's business, Northland Power, and the co-founder with his wife, Louise, of the foundation, said that he had had lots of experiences with organizations, both in the private and public sectors, who had gone through strategic planning processes, which then failed to result in meaningful change, innovation, or advancement of their mission. And he saw how clearly tied to the strategic plan this framework for this gift was and how committed the faculty was to advancing it. And this gave them confidence in our plan and confidence in our ability to receive, manage, and deploy such enormous resources effectively. And it also provided, of course, a common ground for a discussion about a gift that would have a transformative impact, not just on the university's Faculty of Medicine, but on the entire health network of the region, and of course on individuals and societies these institutions serve. Finally, the fourth item really is timing. As they say in comedy and life, timing is everything. In early 2019, the family experienced a major liquidity event, as we say, in their business life, and that enabled them to consider a gift of this magnitude, which, as I said, is unprecedented in Canada. But the timing, the gift announcement itself, I think was just as important. This was announced last September 24th. It's been such an important signal for this to come forward at this time, a signal that generosity and selflessness still matter in the world. It's been so timely for all of us to see an act of such future-focused optimism come forward at a time of such economic uncertainty and social stress. And really, what mattered to them, in large part, was the way it signaled to other philanthropists that it is not a time to hunker down and wait it out. What's at stake here is too important. So we certainly hope their courage will inspire other philanthropists at this difficult time to both accelerate their timetables and lift their sights as well.
Thanks, David. That's just an extraordinary story, and I think can lift all of our spirits at a time like this. I want to mention to all the participants that if you do have questions as we move through our conversation here over the next few minutes, please type those in. Let us know. We will get back to you with some answers, hopefully. David, you and your colleagues at U of T have become an exemplar across North America in securing some of the largest, most transformational gifts, particularly at the $100 million level and higher over this past decade. But we're going to get into the particulars of one of those gifts in just a moment. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about the culture of U of T, which has led to this kind of success. And how can all the advancement leaders that are listening to us today grow a culture like the one you have and are trying to deepen even further at your university?
Well, thanks, Rod. You mentioned culture of the organization. I think that is a very, very important part of the answer to that question. This isn't, of course, about me. There are many brilliant colleagues in advancement and in academic leadership positions who have contributed in countless ways to the success we've had. But there does seem to be something magic in the water in Toronto that seems to enable effective collaboration between disciplines and faculties and even other institutions. We've had a long history of success in creating structures outside the traditional boundaries of faculties and departments to enable this type of cross-disciplinary, cross-faculty collaboration. And more recently, advancement began leveraging this success and applying it to initiatives with significant scale that are focused on major problems or challenges with equally major societal or global impacts. We're talking about big ideas in areas where focused excellence is desired, ideas with broad societal impact, scalable to national or international platforms, ideas with a high potential for collaborators at home and abroad, and able to lift sites both internally and externally. At the heart of these ideas is usually a problem or a challenge, something of significance enough to warrant the type of investments we're talking about. And it often, by virtue of its scale, has a multiplying effects on those announcements. We've also been agnostic as to source of funding and have seen a few examples where there have been a combination of funding sources that have been secured to advance a large-scale initiative. I'll mention three such examples. The Ted Rogers Center for Heart Research, which was established with a $130 million gift, together with $140 million in matching funding by partners. This was an initiative that included two faculties at U of T, Medicine and Engineering, two research-intensive partner hospitals, UHN and Sick Kids Hospital here in Toronto, more than 100 principal investigators at 14 different sites across the three institutions. The Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence is another such initiative. This attracted $210 million in corporate grants, as well as government grants from both the federal and the provincial government. We don't count such grants in our fundraising totals, of course, but together those corporate grants were philanthropic in nature. These government grants were focused on AI research and industry applications, AI-related startups and innovation, and is likely now one of the leading AI institutes of its kind in the world. And a third is not a philanthropic gift or grant. It's a government peer-reviewed grant called Medicine by Design, a regenerative tissue engineering initiative that had 10 university and partner hospitals, $114 million federal grant, and again, not counted in our campaign or in our fundraising totals because it is a government grant, but built on the same framework and foundation and values. Having developed a successful framework that we can repeat for such gifts is one thing, and I'll get into what characterizes that in the moments ahead. But what if you have an idea and you lack the internal funding to develop it, or the critical mass of talent to lead it? So it turns out we've stumbled a few times with these obstacles and trying to get a few more of these initiatives off the ground. So with this track record of success in the three I mentioned and a few other initiatives, and a few failures too, I brought together a group of fellow vice presidents in a highly collaborative plan. This was co-led by the Vice President Research and Innovation, the Vice President International, and myself, to drive excellence in interdisciplinary large-scale initiatives and to create a more streamlined and supportive flight path for how we develop them. It actually began with an interdisciplinary study that was brilliantly led by our host today, Rod Kirsch from GG&A, and John Gleer. It surveyed 67 frontline academic leaders. This led to several retreats with our deans group and ultimately resulted in a unanimous agreement among deans that systemizing our approach to these large-scale interdisciplinary initiatives had to become an institutional priority. We had to find a way to fund it more effectively. The idea was if we could come up with a way to formalize those structures, smooth and make them more efficient, to identify these large-scale ideas, to find the talent to advance them more easily, and then to support, seed, and scale them more effectively, then we could multiply the number of such initiatives that could inspire external funding of 100 million or more. Since that point, we've created an Office of Strategic Initiatives led by an AVP and Vice Provost, a former Dean, It reports jointly to the provost, the vice president research, with a dotted line to me in advancement. And through that initiative, we've now identified new sources of internal funding to seed and develop these large-scale initiatives and a mechanism to reward those with long-term sustainable funding should they get off the ground effectively. So we've done it for two reasons. One is our strength and our leadership in interdisciplinary initiatives like these point to where excellence increasingly will be found and defined in higher education. And two, because it is really the future of large-scale mission-driven philanthropy.
Yeah. David, one of the things that has struck me as I've worked with you and your colleagues over the last 4 years is the really nice, close relationship you have with academic leaders, the provost, deans, faculty thought leaders on campus, and so forth. And if you could take a little bit of time here to talk to us about what advice you give all the advancement leaders on our call today. So at their own home campuses, what kind of framework leads to the creation of compelling gift concepts at the highest levels of philanthropy? And how have you worked with those academic leaders to create these kinds of concepts?
Yeah, that's always a central challenge in pulling these things together. I think like many people on this webinar, I'm often asked by deans, why haven't you brought such and such a donor to me with a 9-figure gift? How come I am not getting my fair share of those donors you keep in your back pocket? I usually give them very politely, of course, because I am Canadian, 2 answers. One of them, I ask, what ideas do you have that will inspire philanthropy at these levels? I think we all agree that these gifts are motivated first and foremost by big ideas, a big challenge at its heart, the leadership and excellence of our capacity to address it. The other question I ask is, what have you done over the past 20 years to cause this person to care deeply about you, your faculty, and your idea? That is, after all, the essence of our mission. It is simply to cause people to care and to care more deeply over time. So at the core of every one of these successful projects, I think, are 3 things. The first is an academic champion at the intersection of disciplines. Usually, this academic leader is able to see excellence across the disciplines and across the university, and sometimes across broader networks outside the university. A champion who understands who the real collaborators are, where talent is concentrated, what talent is needed in which disciplines to drive success in pursuit of a major interdisciplinary problem-based challenge, and the ability to define a concept across this landscape that meaningfully engages star academic partners. This person also needs the humility to set self-interest aside, and I can't emphasize this enough. The most common cause of failure in interdisciplinary initiatives is an attitude of paying lip service to the interdisciplinarity and collaboration, and then taking the money and running. I think the second thing, which has been really something that we've brought to the table in these major gifts and even in some grants, a conceptual framework for deploying the funding that aligns incentives across disciplines, departments, faculties, and sometimes institutions, that aligns incentives, that requires collaboration, that ensures equity, ensures widespread impact on the core challenge, and most importantly, delivers major funding across the participating units in 2 ways. The first is major funding to 2 or 3 large platforms built into the framework to support and catalyze and focus scholars on the major challenges at the core of the idea. These are usually major R&D platforms holding the bulk of the funding. In the Ted Rogers Center for Heart Research, for instance, those platforms were multi-institutional in nature and focused on first genetic genomics biomarkers of disease, secondly, stem cells and regenerative tissue engineering and innovation, and third, new clinical therapies to address heart failure and heart function. So that's one aspect of our framework that has proven to be effective at stimulating, incenting, and requiring interdisciplinary collaboration. A second, though, is equally important, and that is the inclusion of several cross-cutting funding elements that support all members of the coalition, regardless of what aspect of the challenge they're focused on, with funding for things such as graduate student fellowships or catalyzing innovation funds, And such things require, in our model, usually require 2 or more participating units to collaborate in order to access funding. I think the third item and the fourth item, I'll be quick here. The third is governance structures and management oversight mechanisms that keep deans and academic leaders focused on the original mission and vision of the initiative, that avoid institutional drift and empower an academic director to provide oversight across multiple faculties and departments. This is a very tough thing we ask people to do who lead these initiatives across the boundaries and the silos of departments, faculties, and institutions. And fourth, I think really speaking to the advancement side, it's the ability of advancement leaders such as ourselves to build relationships of trust and transparency and integrity, to park their egos at the door, to walk the talk on what it means to be selflessly collaborative.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a list, a checklist of important things that we all need to take into consideration as we work with our academic leaders. Yeah, I'd like to take next question here, really kind of delve a little bit more deeply into one of these extraordinary gifts that you've had. In 2019, the university received a gift of $100 million from Gerald Schwartz and Heather Reisman Foundation. Part of that gift involved a highly interdisciplinary Institute for Technology and Society. And so all of us, you know, are out there. We'd love to have this kind of philanthropy come to, you know, our institutions. What, in your mind, were the convincing factors here that led the donors to make this kind of commitment? And so what really do we need to, questions we need to ask, things we need to think about as we think and consider benefactors at this level?
Well, you know, in this case, I think they were hugely attracted to the scale and impact of the concept. And, you know, this is also very instructive to us. You should never underestimate the power of just simply putting your story out there. So this whole conversation with Heather Reisman and Jerry Schwartz here in Toronto started with a newspaper article on a major new center for innovation at the university. Nearly 1 million square foot development is a very significant development that would bring together and advance the university's, you know, large entrepreneurship, innovation, and commercialization activities, particularly those focused on artificial intelligence and regenerative medicine. The donor saw this article, which included a large and beautiful rendering of the architecture. It's quite impressive for the site. And they said to each other, this is something that our society needs, our economy needs, and we as leading Canadian entrepreneurs who care about societal prosperity and vitality, we have to get behind this. Secondly, they were very interested in the impact of such disruptive technologies on individuals and societies. And they were amazed at the university's capacity to marshal talent across its depth and breadth, to draw multiple disciplines together and focus them on such issues. So in addition to the Innovation Center, this took the form of a new Institute for Society and Technology, which we embedded into the center and which brought together faculty from philosophy, economics, law, social science, public health, medicine, education, and other disciplines, as well as artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning, and computer science and engineering. The Institute was not the largest part of the gift, but for the donors, it became the most exciting, the most motivating, and it was spurred by their own curiosity and concerns for how disruptive technologies can be used or abused and how they might serve society and individuals more effectively. So many of you may have seen the recent documentary on Netflix entitled The Social Dilemma, which focused on Tristan Harris, who is the former chief ethicist at Google. Remember Google's original mantra, do no harm. Well, this individual is now speaking out on technology companies and their role in addiction and privacy breaches, which he describes as features rather than unintended consequences of large-scale social media platforms. Well, that documentary was produced by Heather Reisman, one of our donors, and was already underway when we first talked to them about this gift. So I think this is another example of how the alignment of the donor's passions, the donor's interests and sense of cause aligns with the institution's strengths and its interests in a deeply personal way. For the Schwartz-Reismans and for us, we saw this institute as a natural part of the storied history from the great University of Toronto media theoreticians of the mid-20th century, Harold Innis and Marshall McLuhan, bringing their distinguished lineage to the present day and recognizing that many of the problems we encounter exist in a gap between the advances, for instance, in AI technology and the absence of legal, regulatory, or ethical frameworks for its governance.
You know, David, one of the things that I've learned and appreciated now several years of working really closely with you and your colleagues is that you know, the University of Toronto is an exceptional, entrepreneurial, risk-taking, no challenge too big for us kind of place. And some of what you spoke to today really has even confirmed my sense of the place that you have and how you and your colleagues have evoked that kind of culture and spirit. I'm really interested in this. Really, it's really kind of the last question here. But what, through your experiences, what have you learned generally about interdisciplinary initiatives and tried to foster, spawn, sustain these?
Well, I would say what I've learned most is to see through many of the myths and the misconceptions of interdisciplinary fundraising that we all carry around with us on a frequent basis. First, I'd say we have to recognize that interdisciplinarity is not a virtue unto itself. Institutional excellence arises from disciplinary excellence rooted in departmental structures. However, top researchers today working in highly collaborative environments, they look for disciplinary excellence in their collaborators to advance work in tandem on multiple facets of a complex problem. So there's no doubt that interdisciplinary initiatives can add value to the disciplines at their core. In fact, they often serve as leading indicators for where individual disciplines are going, and hence attractive to top graduate students, those individuals who themselves would likely define the future of those disciplines. I think another point, another sort of misconception is your institute, you know, for gifts like this, where we're looking at gifts of this magnitude for issues, you know, so broad and challenging, your institution is not the cause. Your institution exists in an increasingly competitive environment as one vehicle among many that donors may turn to in order to address their aspirations for major impact on complex global challenges. Another thought that I've certainly experienced is that spawning models for interdisciplinary initiatives can be very inefficient and ineffective. You know, just putting out calls for proposals and trying to spread money around to a whole slew of these things and just to see what bubbles up. Sometimes these spawning models just create small enclaves of collaboration that are sheltered from broader teaching and research responsibilities. The results are often suboptimal. They can actually devalue the concept of a center. We believe that such models succeed better when partners focus jointly on fostering new ideas that are carefully curated for their ability to scale to significant impact. Just a couple more thoughts. Top-down versus bottom-up paradigms of interdisciplinary development. You will hear this quite often. Was that done top-down or was that done bottom-up? I find these paradigms very unhelpful. Large-scale interdisciplinary initiatives that succeed in getting off the ground usually have a dynamic interplay of both top-down and bottom-up approaches. And the more complex the initiative, the more this interplay matters. Sometimes you hear that there is a fear that donors overstep with their involvement in such large-scale initiatives, that donor-driven initiatives can be limiting. Well, again, strong institutions have very clear strategies and deep insights into their capabilities. And they have appropriate controls for approval of academic priorities, proposals, gift agreements, and so forth. Donors can sometimes play a role in stimulating focus, creativity, and a bigger vision, and maybe a greater precision about academic outcomes. But institutions can act with confidence if they're standing on firm ground of stated academic plans, priorities, and procedures for evaluation. And that just brings me to a couple more points. Accountability is not incompatible with academic freedom. We get this question quite a lot when we are dealing with donors for such significant gifts who expect measurable outcomes, key performance indicators. They want to understand how their gifts are making a difference. Here, our feeling is if we hold ourselves accountable, our academic units accountable to their academic plans through an approved process of academic assessment under the guidance of the provost, for instance, this is not an affront to academic integrity, but a reasonable standard to which any initiative should be held. And then finally, many times donors will ask, well, I'm putting in 100 million or 200 million or some very large amount. What are you putting in? What's the skin in the game? Well, that's not an unreasonable question. Donors naturally seek leverage for investments of this kind of magnitude, and it may create unwelcome pressure on scarce resources. I think our response has been to realize that we often vastly understate our own skin in the game by failing to quantify the very substantial resources we inevitably commit to such new initiatives, such as the full cost of salary lines, beyond that supported by endowments, for instance, the full cost of postdocs and grad students, of lab startup costs, of bench fees, of operating costs and administrative overheads. So those are some of the myths and misconceptions about interdisciplinary fundraising. I would just want to conclude by saying probably the greatest asset that we have as an institution is the willingness of the president, the provost, the vice presidents, and our deans to work in highly collaborative fashion to advance these major initiatives. And their understanding that this is really fundamental to how institutions like ours will define their excellence going forward. I'll pause there, Rod, in case you have any other questions.
David, thanks so much. Sadly, I have many more questions. Sadly, our time has come to an end. And I do hope that we can have you back in some type of format in the future because there's so much more to talk about, the complexities of this, the fascinating work that can be done and so forth, you know. So please give us a rain check to come back again so we can talk further about these kinds of things. I'd like to thank all the participants today who are with us. We are deeply appreciative to you for giving our time. And thanks again, David, for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us. I bid you all farewell and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.